Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Church in Fall River. It's lovely to be here. I know it's supposed to be maybe a little snowy today, but all the way down it was snowing, yet the sun was coming through my sunroof. So perhaps not as dire as we thought. My name is Barbara Dingwall Mills. I'm the half-time minister at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Weymouth, but it's lovely to be here in Fall River with you today. So welcome. And Richard, would you be willing to light the chalice for us? Thank you. Our opening hymn this morning is number 44. It's in your hymnal, and it is called "We Sing of Golden Mornings." It may not quite be golden yet, but it's still one of my favorite songs. Please stand as you are able, and Nancy will accompany us and make us sound good. That sounded beautiful. Please be seated. I don't know if it sounded as lovely to you as it did to me. Perhaps it's the acoustics here, but it was just gorgeous to hear that coming up here. So thank you. Golden voices. Yes, yes, that's a lovely thing on a Sunday morning. Would you join with me in saying our affirmation? It is right in your order of service. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve human need, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other and with God. If you look on the back of your order of service, I think there may be some announcements there. Social hour follows this, I know that. I think there were some on the inside of your order of service. Did you have some? Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. You're welcome. Nice to see you again. No, there was no traffic. And I want to let everyone know that Paul Sprecher will be joining us next week, so please do come. We haven't seen him in over a year, so please do come. You can feel welcome. And for those of us that are joining or concerned, but let me also announce that I saw Deborah from this week, and she sent us a bag of talks for a collection for the homeless, and she did have an overnight in the hospital this week, but she's feeling rather better and is getting some significant rest. Thank you.
Thank you. Tomorrow, Martin Luther King Day, I'll be here at the Unitarian Society co-hosting our Revolution here in Fall River, a MLK Junior Day feasting, pop-up dinner, and favorite MLK Junior readings. So many of you have already waited early morning. We have a wide array of food desserts to beverages to main courses and side dishes. So whatever you choose to bring would be appreciated. We're doing setup, I think today, we're going to set up the tables today, but just come before 6. We say kind of flyer 5 o'clock, but you can come as late as 5:30 just to get the food set up, and then hopefully we'll start promptly at 6. After Richard to give a welcome, maybe a little reflection prior to us starting. A little prayer of some sort, whatever you choose to do. Do
I look like a deer in the headlights?
You do, Richard, but that's okay.
I'm sure you can rise to the occasion. So, encourage you all to come. I think we've got around 20 to 30 people. Like we're doing 20, I think, getting some feedback from all this. So I'm just suggesting 20 to 30 people. I guess we're going to count it that many back there. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
My announcement is the perennial one, which is of course miracles every Friday from 9 to 10. Most of our readers are right here in this room. Trudeau and Dave Locke. And Donald, who keeps us all on course. And Al, I think, is probably listening to Zoom. So, we discuss, of course, the miracles you haven't, you just heard about it and listened to it, it's the kind of thing that you can argue with, or agree with, or some mix of that, but it will change who you are.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else? No, thanks for sharing those. I appreciate that. And I know your fellow congregants do also. As far as the MLK event tomorrow, that sounds marvelous. Thank you for being involved in that. Nancy? Thank you, Nancy. That was beautiful. When I looked out, I saw more people with eyes closed than not. I think that's a nice sign. My reading this morning is not really that, although I will read it. It is a collection of quotes by Martin Luther King Jr. Last Sunday in Weymouth, I spoke about Martin Luther King Jr. And we spoke a lot about the new bronze statue, for lack of a better word, on Boston Common. And yes, I think it's beautiful too. It's called The Embrace. It was just revealed, shall we say, the other day. It will be there. I think it is 20 tons. So I'm assuming it will be there forever. I can't imagine a storm of any magnitude taking that away. The maker, shall we say, the sculptor, was interviewed the other day. And one of the things he talked about when he was asked, why were there no faces? Why no bodies? He said, an embrace is a universal sign of love and acceptance. And that was his reasoning for only doing the arms and the shoulders. And it was modeled on an embrace of the two of them. And if you happen to see the picture from which it is derived, there is nothing but joy on the faces of Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King at that moment. But I think it is translated into just that simple embrace. So I have yet to see it in person, but it is one of my goals in the very near future, and I hope it'll be one of yours too. I'm going to share a few quotes with you. You'll probably hear some of these tomorrow One of the ones I like most, especially in light of some of the anti-Semitism and anti any kind of culture, it appears, that isn't white, that is out there and about. I love this one. In the end, he said, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. This one is one of my favorites. Freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. And this one I just adore. The time is always right to do what is right. He also said, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. And one of his quotes, I think, that sums it all up. He said, I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear. I love that thought, that hate is just too difficult to carry around. I often think that it is a burden. If I'm angry with someone, frustrated, ticked off, whatever, I can carry that. I have carried that. I don't like carrying it. It is so heavy. It is so destructive. If we can let it go and embrace love instead, I think we're on a better path, a kinder path, definitely a gentler path. I'd like to have you join me now in prayer and meditation. This prayer is by Edwin C. Lynn, and I think it sets the tone for a few moments of meditation. We breathe in faith and exhale hopelessness. We breathe in gratitude and exhale indifference. We breathe in beauty and exhale insensitivity. We breathe in joy and exhale sadness. We breathe in kindness and exhale harshness. We breathe in forgiveness and exhale resentment. We breathe in love and exhale isolation. I invite you now to take a few moments and put yourself into a state of either prayer or meditation, or if you can, both. Take a few moments. You have nice soft seats to snuggle into. It's cozy here. It's welcoming here. It's warm here. Take some time, after which we will sing hymn number 123, Spirit of Life. Thank you, Nancy. Henry David Thoreau was born in Concord, Massachusetts on July 12, 1817. He was the son of Cynthia Dunbar and John Thoreau, and one of 4 siblings. He studied at Harvard College between 1833 and 1837. He lived in Hollis Hall, and he took courses in rhetoric, and classics, philosophy, mathematics, and science. He was a member of the Institute of 1770, now the Hasty Pudding Club. And according to legend, Thoreau refused to pay the $5 fee, approximately equivalent to $130 now, for a Harvard diploma, stating that, quote, every sheep should keep its own skin, end quote. Now, after graduating from college, Thoreau returned to his family's home. Law, the church, business, medicine, none of them interested him. So he taught school for a few years in Canton, where he dropped out of college only to return and graduate a few years later. Upon graduation, he joined the faculty at a public school in Concord, but resigned shortly thereafter when he found out that corporal punishment was being used as a means of discipline. He and his brother opened the Concord Academy in 1838, a progressive grammar school for area children. Here they taught not only the classics, but also engaged in nature walks and visits to local shops and businesses. His brother, John, died soon thereafter when he cut himself badly while shaving, developed tetanus, and then succumbed to his illness in 1842. None of which would have happened today. Henry met Ralph Waldo Emerson in Concord, and they became fast friends. Although Emerson was 14 years Henry's senior, he took a paternal interest in the young man and introduced him to many influential friends, including William Ellery Channing, a Unitarian minister, Margaret Fuller, a fellow transcendentalist and women's rights advocate, and Bronson Alcott, a fellow educator. Emerson urged Thoreau to offer his essays and poems to The Dial, a literary magazine run by Margaret Fuller. Thoreau is a philosopher of nature and its relation to the human condition, and in his early years, he followed transcendentalism, a loose and eclectic idealist philosophy advocated by Emerson, Fuller, and Alcott. They held that an ideal spiritual state transcends or goes beyond the physical and empirical, and that one achieves that insight via personal intuition rather than religious doctrine. In their view, nature is the outward sign of inward spirit, expressing the radical correspondence of visible things and human thoughts, as Emerson wrote in his essay, Nature, in 1836. On April 18, 1841, Thoreau moved into the Emerson household. There, from 1841 to 1844, he served as a children's tutor. He was also an editorial assistant, a repairman, and a gardener. Thoreau later returned to Concord and worked in his family's pencil factory. which he would continue to do alongside his writing and other work for most of his adult life. He rediscovered the process of making good pencils with inferior graphite by using clay as the binder. This invention allowed profitable use of a graphite source found in New Hampshire that had been purchased in 1821 by Thoreau's uncle, Charles Dunbar. Later, Thoreau converted the pencil factory to produce plumbago, a name for graphite at the time, which was used in the electrifying process. Once back in Concord, Thoreau went through a restless period. In fact, most of his life, he was restless. In April of 1844, he and his friend, Edward Hoare, accidentally set a fire that consumed 300 acres of Walden Woods, not far from an area at which he would later erect his own cottage. He later wrote about that. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. I did not wish to live what was not life. Living is so dear. Nor did I wish to practice resignation unless it was quite necessary. I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life, to live so sturdily and Spartan-like as to put to rout all that was not life, to cut a broad swath and shave close, to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms. And if it proved to be me, why then to get the whole and genuine meanness of it and publish its meanness to the world. Or if it were sublime, to know it by experience and be able to give a true account of it in my next excursion. Now, in March of 1845, Ellery Channing told Thoreau, go out upon that, build yourself a hut, and there begin the process of devouring yourself alive. I see no other alternative, no other hope for you. Thus, on July 4th, 1845, Thoreau embarked on a 2-year experiment in simple living, moving to a small house that he had built on land owned by Emerson in a second growth forest. He destroyed the first one, around the shores of Walden Pond. The house was in a pretty pasture and a woodlot of 14 acres that Emerson had bought, 1.5 miles from his family home. On July 24th or 25th, 1846, Thoreau ran into the local tax collector, Sam Staples, who asked him to pay 6 years of delinquent poll taxes. Thoreau, of course, refused because of his opposition to the Mexican-American War and slavery, or so he cited, and he spent a night in jail because of this refusal. The next day, Thoreau was freed when someone, likely to have been his aunt, paid the taxes against his wishes. The experience had a strong impact on Thoreau. In January and February of 1848, he delivered lectures on the rights and duties of the individual in relation to government, explaining his tax resistance at the Concord Lyceum. Bronson Alcott attended the lecture, writing in his journal on January 26th. Heard Thoreau's lecture before the Lyceum on the relation of the individual to the state. That's an admirable statement of the rights of the individual to self-government, and it was an attentive audience. His allusions to the Mexican War, to Mr. Hoare's expulsion from Carolina, his own imprisonment in Concord jail for refusal to pay his tax, Mr. Hoare's payment of mine when taken to prison for a similar refusal, were all pertinent, well considered, and reasoned. I took great pleasure in this deed of Thoreau's. Thoreau revised the lecture into an essay entitled Resistance to Civil Government, or as we know it, Civil Disobedience. It was published by Elizabeth Peabody in the Aesthetic Papers in May of 1849. Thoreau left Walden Pond on September 6 of 1847. I'm going to take a moment here, and Richard, would you be willing to look at this and then pass it around? It is a picture of the very sparse cottage in which he lived for 2 years. I could stay there about a weekend. So Thoreau left Walden Pond on September 6, 1847. At Emerson's request, he immediately moved back to the Emerson house to help Emerson's wife, Lydian, manage the household while her husband was on an extended trip to Europe. Over several years, as he worked to pay off his debts, he continuously revised the manuscript of what he eventually published as Walden, or Life in the Woods, in 1854, recounting the 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days he had spent at Walden Pond. The book compresses that time into a single calendar year, using the passage of the 4 seasons to symbolize human development. Part memoir and part spiritual quest, Walden at first won few admirers, but later critics have regarded it as a classic American work that explores natural simplicity, harmony, and beauty as models for just social and cultural conditions. The American poet Robert Frost wrote of Thoreau, in one book, he surpasses everything we've had in America. The American author John Updike said of the book, a century and a half after its publication, Walden has become such a totem of the back to nature, preservationist, anti-business, civil disobedience mindset. And Thoreau, so vivid a protester, so perfect a crank and hermit saint, that the book risks being as revered and unread as the Bible. Thoreau moved out of Emerson's house in July of 1848, and he stayed at a house on nearby Belknap Street. In 1850, he moved into a house at 255 Main Street, where he lived until his death at only 44 on May 6, 1862, after a long battle with tuberculosis. Now, Thoreau never married or had children. In fact, whether he was gay or straight or something else has never been established. He lived much of his life alone, even though he lived with others, most often with the Emerson household. Thoreau had few friends and fewer confidants. I do not mean to imply that he was mean or even a recluse, although he, of course, did live primarily by himself for more than 2 years at Walden Pond. What he was a thinker, a philosopher, a teacher, a poet, a writer, a searcher. Thoreau's discussion of love and friendship urges us to reflect upon what we can and cannot expect from our closest human relationships and on their role in a good life. He asked much of not only himself, but of those whose friendship he did cultivate. To be Thoreau's friend must have been very difficult indeed. While theoretically, I admire Thoreau, realistically, it's hard for me to do so. He lived off of his acquaintances whenever he could. He borrowed money from them constantly, especially Emerson and his aunt, and he seldom paid any of it back. And for a man who claimed to be independent and to wish, quote, to suck out all the marrow of life, unquote, he seemed often to be able to do that, only at the expense of others. It is not my intention to besmirch the reputation or authenticity of this man. Rather, my intent is to lay open another side of him. To hold such a man in such high esteem as Americans in the world still do is not wrong, just myopic. Thoreau could only afford to live Spartan-like and to suck out all the marrow of life because of benefactors like Emerson and Margaret Fuller, who together and separately supported and provided him with income. Without their assistance, Henry would have found himself in jail more than once for not paying his taxes. He refused to pay any himself, but if his friends had done the same thing, there might have been no house and no land in which and on which he could have lived. Living deliberately is a very lofty goal. It's a good goal and an admirable one. I love to read of Thoreau's determination and resilience and fortitude. He inspires me and makes me wish to really examine my life. I do not refute the admiration that Frost, Updike, and others held for him. Maybe, however, Ellery Channing was correct when he told Thoreau to go out upon that, build yourself a hut, and there begin the grand process of devouring yourself alive. I see no other alternative, no other hope for you. I too want to live my life deliberately, just not doing so while also living off of others' largesse. Sorry if I burst anybody's bubbles about Thoreau. I just read a book recently about Einstein, and it's called The Other Einstein. And if you've never read it, I recommend it highly. It's his wife's view on Albert. Perhaps Albert was not quite as loving as we might like to think. It's now time for our offertory. I invite you to come forward as you are able to contribute financially to the well-being of this church. Thank you, Nancy. Now is the time for sharing of joys and concerns. If you share your joys with us, we will exude happiness with you and for you. If you share your sorrows with us, we will offer you solace and hopefully a little comfort.
I'm an infrequent flyer on eBay, and I'm always looking at either motorcycles or guitars. I used to have a BMW R60, so that's my ideal for a motorcycle. And the guitar is anything made by Mr. Hauser from Deutschland, Germany. And I happened to see an inexpensive by Mr. Hauser. I bought it. Haven't paid for it yet, but so I'll bring it as a take a look and see what that actually plays out.
Can we get a concert out of you?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Hold them to it. Did you say it was extensive or expensive, or both?
Inexpensive.
Inexpensive. Oh, okay, that's even better.
Non-used, so you can easily put it
I've heard that. Okay.
Reminded of, 50 years ago, actually, now, I was a helicopter pilot on the Coast Guard Air Station Cape Cod over at Otis Air Force. And the flight suit had about a dozen pockets in it. And pocket right there, I had collected works of Thoreau. Was gone here, and long nights of standing duty every third night. I always picked it up and we have paid it. Love that guy.
Still, even after the awful things I said. Even after that. Okay, good.
My wife believes everything you say.
Good for her. Yeah.
Just concern for a friend of ours, we ran into the library yesterday, and her husband's in the hospital, and she's very nervous about things, some kind of blood infection, and they don't know what or why. But so Carol and Philip, if we can send up a blog for them.
Thanks.
So well has been said hello. We had a very full house over Christmas, and we had mentioned, 7 adults and 5 adults and there were a lot of germs exchanged. So well is still getting over that. It was great. It was wonderful. But we did miss you all and well.
Again, reflecting on Martin Luther King Day, the first time I came to the Unitarian Church was as when Bruno Lister, former minister, was here, and it was in March, on the day or weekend of Martin Luther King's assassination. From the library to the old church that used to be at this location. So that was my introduction to this space, and I've considered it my spiritual home since then. So I'm happy to be connected to all of you in this place. Interestingly, yesterday, and this was about maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, I told you that the Proud Boys, a fascist Nazi uniform group of young men, and about a dozen of them, maybe 2 dozen of them came to Fall River to protest drag queen reading in the library. And they were very orchestrated, they were very well organized, and they were very nasty and abusive to people, both the gay people and they had particularly to the parents who were bringing their children to the reading. And so the group that organized the reading, including the city of Fall River, committed to continuing these storytellings. And yesterday there was anticipation that there was going to be another kind of confrontation. However, the LGBT community and their allies, including many clergy, labor unions, lawyers, family, friends, and a whole lot of gay folks came to the library in terms of like hundreds, probably about 200 people there. And I was told that some of the Proud Boys came and turned around and left. There were maybe 5 people that remained in confrontational, but really joyfully, Fall River came up in full force to say there was no hate that was going to be happening in our town. So I was very pleased, and it was a great joy. Yet a concern, because I'm sure there's going to be more as days and weeks go on.
Thank you. I often wonder what they're so proud of.
I have a good readjustment of my faith here in this church. My joy is always being here every Sunday, waking up and being alive and saying thank you, God, for giving me another day. I'm here and sharing and learning something new that as she had spoken in her sermon, you could do things that I'm learning. I learned a lot being here at the church, and I'm very happy and joyful of knowing that I have a place to go and not have to be judged about what I like or what I don't like. But my life now has changed, and I'm happy where I'm at. And I appreciate anyone here with the love and concerns. Thank you.
Thank you all for sharing. If sickness was one thing you spoke of, which I think it was, Nancy, I hope that things get better there. If social awareness is something, I hope that that call helps us all to be a little more socially aware. And if a lovely family gathering, even taking a little chance there, as far as COVID and everything else that's out there. I hope that we can all stay safe from those. I have two friends who had COVID early on and both almost died, a husband and a wife. And they are now, of course, fully vaccinated, but they got it again. And the female, my good friend, and her husband are both on Paxlovid, is that the correct pronunciation, I think, and came off of it today. But she has terrible asthma. And so she was in the hospital for 2 days this time, but recovering. So it's still out there, folks. So let's all be aware of that and try to keep ourselves and our loved ones safe and healthy. Thank you all for sharing. Yes.
I just want to tell you, we have a comment in our meeting chat, someone was watching.
Oh, good.
I wanted to comment and say, excellent sermon today. I like your alternative view of his actions and his behaviors.
Well, one person watched. Thank you. That's good. That's a good thing. Yeah. Our closing hymn is number 1. I know it's one of my good friend Richard's and probably my very favorite hymn. May nothing evil cross this door. Would you stand as you are able? As we leave this sacred space, let us remember that it is love that spurs us on. It is love that makes life worthwhile. It is love that gives us friendship. It is love that is the answer. Enjoy your week. Amen. Thank you. Nancy?